I found my birth mother living in the Cascade Mountains with the creature that raised her, and I know exactly how insane that sounds. But on August 14th, 2010, I stood in a clearing 43 miles northeast of Concrete, Washington, watching a 9-foot-tall bipedal being gently hand my mother a bundle of wild mushrooms while she smiled at it like it was the most natural thing in the world. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a data analyst from Portland, Oregon, and for 37 years, I believed my origin story was simple and sad. I was wrong about everything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were when I processed quarterly reports for the firm, and I'd been staring at spreadsheets for 6 hours when my wife Emma brought in the mail. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive paper, and with my name handwritten in elegant cursive that seemed to belong to another era. No return address. Inside, a single page, also handwritten, that began with 4 words that stopped my heart. Marcus, I am ready. The letter explained that my birth mother had left information with an adoption registry 20 years earlier, requesting contact only when she felt capable of meeting me. For 2 decades, she'd checked a box that said, no. This year, she'd finally checked yes. The registry had her current preferences on file. She wanted to meet. She wanted to explain. She lived off-grid and could only be reached by physical mail sent to a P.O. box in Concrete, a town I had to look up on a map. Population, 705 people, depending on the season. I was adopted at 6 days old in Portland. The records were sealed, as they often were in the 1970s. My adoptive parents, Robert and Susan Webb, were good people who gave me a stable childhood in the suburbs. They'd told me about the adoption when I was 7, answered my questions honestly within the limits of what they knew, which wasn't much. A young woman, alone, unable to care for a child. The standard story. They'd offered to help me search when I turned 18, but I'd declined. I had a family. I had a life. The past was the past. But holding that letter, I realized the past had just knocked on my door. Emma saw my face and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. We'd been married for 9 years. She knew my expressions better than I did. It's her, isn't it? She asked. I nodded, sliding the letter across the table. She read it slowly, her lips moving slightly with the words, as a habit from her teaching days that I'd always found endearing. When she finished, she looked up with tears in her eyes. You have to go, she said. Not a question, a statement of fact. I wrote back that same night. Simple, straightforward. Yes, I wanted to meet. Yes, I had questions. Yes, I understood she lived remotely and I was willing to travel. I included my phone number, my email, every possible way to reach me. I drove to the post office the next morning and sent it certified mail, then spent 2 weeks checking my phone every 30 minutes like a teenager waiting for a text from a crush. I was 41 years old and I felt like I was drowning in hope. Her response came 3 weeks later, another handwritten letter. Her name was Elizabeth Chen. She was 62 years old. She'd given birth to me when she was 24 in a small hospital in Everett, Washington, on March 3, 1973. She'd held me for 6 hours before signing the papers. She'd thought about me every day since, and then the letter took a turn I didn't expect. She explained that she couldn't come to Portland. She couldn't meet me in a coffee shop or a park or any place with people. She lived in a way that made conventional meetings impossible. If I wanted answers, I would have to come to her, and I would have to come alone, and I would have to trust her enough to follow specific instructions that would seem strange. The instructions were indeed strange. I was to arrive in Concrete on September 11th, 2010. I was to check into the Cascade Mountain Inn, the only motel in town. I was to bring hiking boots, warm clothing, a good flashlight, and enough food and water for 2 days. I was to tell no one where I was going or why. At exactly 7 a.m. on September 12th, I was to drive north on Baker Lake Road until I reached mile marker 17.2, where I would find a fire road marked only by a stack of 3 white stones. I was to follow that road for 2.4 miles until it ended, then wait. Someone would meet me. Emma didn't like it. "This sounds like the beginning of a horror movie," she said, and she wasn't entirely wrong. But something in those letters, in the careful handwriting and the specificity of the details and the obvious difficulty it took to write them, convinced me this was real. This was my mother. She had reasons for the secrecy, and I needed to know what they were. We compromised. I would go, but I would check in with Emma every 12 hours by phone. If she didn't hear from me, she would call the police. I would bring a GPS tracker. I would be careful. The drive from Portland to Concrete took 3.5 hours. Interstate 5 to Highway 20, through landscape that shifted from urban sprawl to dense forest with startling abruptness. The Cascade Mountain Inn was exactly as anonymous as it sounded. A single-story building with 12 rooms and a view of the North Fork Nooksack River. The woman at the desk looked at me with the knowing expression of someone who'd seen visitors like me before. "Hiking?" she asked. "Something like that," I replied. She handed me a key to room 7 and told me breakfast started at 6:30. I thanked her and didn't mention I'd be gone before breakfast. I didn't sleep well, and the room smelled like pine cleaner and old carpet, and every time I closed my eyes, I imagined scenarios. My mother as a hermit, living in a shack, paranoid and fragile. My mother as part of some survivalist compound, ready to recruit me into a cult. My mother as someone who'd changed her mind and wouldn't show up at all. I'd brought a thermos of coffee and a notebook, thinking I might write down questions. But every question I came up with felt either too big or too small. "Why did you give me up?" seemed both too obvious and too enormous. At 3 a.m. I gave up on sleep and sat by the window, watching the stars over the mountains and wondering what the hell I was doing. 7 a.m. came with cold clarity. The temperature was 43 degrees, the sky was cloudless, and I was terrified. I drove north on Baker Lake Road with the precision of someone following a treasure map, watching the odometer tick through the miles. 16.8, 16.9, 17.0, 17.2. And there they were, 3 white stones stacked beside a narrow dirt track that disappeared into the trees. I turned onto the fire road and felt the car drop into ruts that suggested very few people ever came this way. 2.4 miles took 15 minutes of careful driving through forest so dense the sunlight barely penetrated. The road ended at a small clearing, just as the letter had promised. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat in the sudden silence. Birds were singing. Ravens, I thought, or crows. Something rustled in the underbrush. The air smelled like cedar and damp earth and something else, and something wild I couldn't identify. I checked my phone. No service. I'd expected that. I got out of the car, pulled on my backpack, and waited. She appeared so quietly, I didn't notice her until she spoke. "Marcus?" A woman's voice, soft but clear. I spun around, and there she was, standing at the edge of the clearing, like she'd materialized from the trees themselves. Elizabeth Chen was smaller than I'd imagined, maybe 5'3", with long black hair streaked with grey pulled back in a braid. She wore practical clothes, cargo pants, and a fleece jacket, and boots that had seen serious use. Her face was weathered in the way of people who spent their lives outdoors, but her eyes were warm and dark, and filled with an expression I recognized from photographs of myself. "Hi," I managed, my voice catching. I'm Marcus." She smiled, and I saw my smile reflected back at me. "I know," she said. "You look just like your father." That hit me like a physical blow. In all my imaginings of this moment, I'd somehow never considered that there'd been a father, that I looked like someone other than her. She saw my expression, and her smile turned sad. "There's so much to tell you," she said. "But first, we need to walk. Are you ready?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. She turned and started into the forest, following what I could barely recognize as a trail. I followed. We walked for over an hour. She moved through the forest with the confidence of someone who knew every root and rock, while I stumbled and slipped and tried to keep up. She didn't talk beyond occasional warnings about obstacles. "Root here. Watch the left side, it's slippery. Duck and low branch." I wanted to flood her with questions, but something about the way she moved, purposeful and focused, told me to wait. We were going somewhere specific, and whatever she needed to tell me, she needed to show me first. The forest changed as we climbed. The trees grew larger, older, their trunks so wide I couldn't have wrapped my arms around them. The air grew cooler and carried scents I couldn't name. Mushrooms, maybe. Moss. Something else. That same wild smell from the clearing, stronger now. Elizabeth stopped at a fallen log, pulled out a water bottle from her pack, and took a long drink. She offered it to me, and I accepted, grateful. "We're almost there," she said. "Before we arrive, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen with an open mind." I sat down on the log, my legs aching from the climb. "Oh, okay," I said. She sat beside me, not quite touching, a mother and son who were strangers, learning how to occupy the same space. "When I gave you up," she began, "it wasn't because I didn't want you. It was because I was terrified. Terrified of what my life had become. Terrified of what people would think. Terrified of what you would think when you were old enough to understand." She paused, choosing words carefully. I was raised in Seattle by parents who expected certain things. Good grades, good college, good career, good marriage. I delivered on most of it. Straight A's at the University of Washington, degree in environmental biology, graduate program in wildlife ecology. I was on track to become a professor, maybe work for the Park Service. Normal life. In my last year of graduate school, 1971, I got a research grant to study wildlife behavior in the North Cascades. Remote camera placement, habitat analysis, that sort of thing. I was supposed to spend 6 months in the backcountry collecting data. It was exactly what I wanted, alone in nature, doing real science, far from expectations and dinner parties, and people asking when I was going to settle down. She looked at me directly now, her eyes searching mine. I spent 3 months setting up cameras in areas so remote most people will never see them. And I started noticing things. Signs, tracks that didn't match any known animal. Trees stripped of bark in patterns that made no sense. Structures made of branches that looked almost deliberate. I documented everything because that's what scientists do. She stood up, started pacing, energy building in her voice. And then one morning in July, I saw one. Not a bear, not a person in a costume. A real, living, breathing creature that walked on 2 legs and stood over 8 feet tall and watched me from across a ravine with intelligence I could feel even at that distance. I froze. It froze. We stared at each other for maybe 30 seconds, and then it turned and walked into the forest, and I stood there shaking so hard I had to sit down. She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. I was a scientist, a rational person. I had 2 degrees and a commitment to observable, repeatable phenomena. and I'd just seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. I should have left, packed up my gear, gone back to Seattle, written a careful report about ambiguous findings. But I couldn't, because if they were real, if there was a population of unknown primates living in these mountains, that was the discovery of the century. That was proof of something magnificent. So I stayed. I set up more cameras. I left food offerings. I made myself predictable, visible, non-threatening. And slowly, over weeks, I gained their trust. She turned to look at me, and her expression was a mixture of joy and grief. There were 5 of them in this area, a family group, 2 adults, 3 juveniles. They started letting me observe them, started accepting my presence, and one of them, the larger male, started bringing me things, interesting rocks, bundles of plants, once, incredibly, a deer antler that still had velvet on it. I realized my mouth was open. I closed it. "Mom," I said, testing the word, feeling it strange on my tongue. "Are you telling me you met Bigfoot?" She smiled at the name. "That's what the tabloids call them. The indigenous peoples of this region have dozens of names. I call them what they seem to be, a species of great ape that adapted to temperate forests instead of tropical ones. But yes, Marcus, that's what I'm telling you. And it gets more complicated." She sat back down, closer this time, and took my hand. Her skin was rough, calloused, warm. "His name is Koa. That's not his real name, obviously. They communicate with sounds I can't reproduce. But I needed to call him something, and Koa means warrior in Hawaiian, and he was protective and strong, and it seemed to fit. We developed a relationship, not romantic," she added quickly, seeing my expression. "Not physical in that way, but intimate, deep. He taught me which plants were medicinal and showed me how to move through the forest without leaving traces, brought his family to meet me. And I taught him things too, showed him my camera equipment, played him music on a battery-powered radio, read to him from books, even though I don't know how much he understood. We had 7 months together before I realized I was pregnant." The world tilted. I stood up, needing to move, needing to process. "Wait," I said. "Wait, are you saying—" I couldn't finish the sentence. She shook her head quickly. "No, God no. Koa isn't your father, Marcus. That would be biologically impossible. Your father was a man named David Park, a fellow graduate student I'd been dating casually before I left for the field. We'd spent 1 weekend together in June before I came up here. I hadn't thought much about it because we'd been careful, or so I thought, but apparently not careful enough." She stood, moved closer. "I didn't realize I was pregnant until I was almost 5 months along. I'd been so focused on the research, living on minimal food, hiking constantly. I'd missed the signs, and when I finally figured it out, I was terrified. I couldn't go back to Seattle pregnant and unmarried in 1972. My parents would have been devastated. David would have felt obligated to propose, and I didn't love him enough for that. I couldn't tell anyone about the real reason I'd stayed in the mountains. Who would believe me? I'd be labeled crazy, lose my career before it started. So I made a decision that haunts me still. I stayed. I stayed in the forest with Koa and his family, and I gave birth to you there, with a creature whose species doesn't have a name helping me through labor, because I had no one else. I sat back down because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. You gave birth in the woods, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. With Bigfoot as your midwife? She nodded. March 3rd, 1973, in a small cave about 2 miles from here. Koa's mate, I call her Luna, brought me water and moss to cushion the ground. Koa himself stayed at the cave entrance, keeping watch. When you were born and started crying, he came closer, cautious, curious. You were the first human infant he'd ever seen, and the sound you made when you cried, he responded to it. made a soft hooting noise, almost soothing. You stopped crying and looked at him, and I swear to you, Marcus, I saw recognition pass between you, an infant and a creature of the wild, both innocent, both pure. I kept you for 6 days, fed you, held you, loved you with an intensity I didn't know was possible. But I also knew I couldn't raise you there. You needed medical care, vaccinations, education, a future. Koa and his family could keep me alive in the forest, but a human baby? The risks were too enormous. So I hiked out, carrying you wrapped in my coat, and I hitchhiked to Everett. I showed up at the hospital with a story about a home birth gone wrong, and they were too focused on checking you over to ask many questions. You were healthy, perfect, and I knew what I had to do. Tears were streaming down her face now, and I realized I was crying too. I signed the papers. I left you with people who could give you everything I couldn't, and then I came back here, because I couldn't bear to return to normal life after what I'd experienced. I've lived off-grid for 37 years. Koa and his family accepted me back. They've become my family. I learned to live by their rhythms, hunt and gather and move with the seasons. I built a small cabin with materials from the forest, solar panels for minimal electricity, rain collection for water. I hike to concrete twice a month for supplies I can't make or find. It's a life people would consider primitive, but it's mine and it's real. And I've never regretted staying except for one thing: losing you. She reached out, touched my face with a gentleness that made my chest ache. I thought about you every single day, wondered if you were happy, if you were safe, if you'd grown up to be kind. And when the adoption registry contacted me last year, asking if I wanted to update my information, I finally felt ready to risk you knowing the truth, ready to risk you thinking I'm insane. I didn't know what to say. The logical part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible, that I was the victim of an elaborate delusion or prank. But the emotional part, the part that had spent 37 years with a hole in my identity, shaped like a mother's absence, believed every word. I don't think you're insane, I finally managed. I think I need to see this to believe it, but I don't think you're insane. She smiled through her tears, relief flooding her features. Then come with me, she said. The cabin is just over this ridge, and if we're lucky, Koa will be there. He knows about you. I told him years ago, and showed him the photograph I took of you before I left you at the hospital. He's curious. He wants to meet the baby he helped bring into the world. We climbed the final stretch in silence, my mind spinning with questions I didn't know how to articulate. The ridge crested and dropped into a small valley, hidden from any trail or road, protected by rock faces on 3 sides. At the center stood a cabin that looked like it had grown from the forest itself, built from weathered logs and fitted so perfectly into the landscape I almost didn't see it at first. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. A small vegetable garden grew near the door. Solar panels angled on the roof caught the morning light. It looked peaceful, impossible, real. And standing beside the cabin, waiting with a patience that suggested he'd been there for some time, was Koa. I stopped breathing. He was massive, easily 9 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair that caught the sunlight like copper wire. His face was a mixture of human and ape, with a prominent brow, dark eyes that held startling intelligence, and a mouth that seemed capable of expression beyond what should be possible. He wore no clothing because he needed none. His body was adapted to this climate, this life, in ways humans had forgotten. And he was looking directly at me with an expression I could only describe as gentle curiosity. Elizabeth touched my arm lightly. "It's okay," she said softly. "He won't hurt you. He's protective, but he's kind. Just move slowly. Let him approach you." I nodded, not trusting my voice. and stood still as a creature that wasn't supposed to exist walked toward me on two legs with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. He stopped about 10 feet away and made a sound, low and melodic, almost like a question. Elizabeth responded with a similar sound, her throat producing notes I didn't think human vocal cords could make. They were communicating, actually communicating. Koa took another step closer. I could smell him now, earthy and wild, like cedar and rain and something else, something primal. He raised one massive hand slowly, palm up, in what I recognized as a universal gesture of peace. Without thinking, I did the same. We stood there, man and creature, both born of this planet but worlds apart, our palms facing each other across impossible space. And then he did something that shattered every remaining doubt I had. He made a sound I recognized. The same soft hooting my mother had described, the sound he'd made when I was born, the sound that had calmed me as an infant. Tears were pouring down my face, and I didn't care. This was real, all of it. My mother hadn't abandoned me for selfish reasons or inability to cope. She'd made an impossible choice in impossible circumstances. She'd given me a life of normalcy and safety while choosing to live in harmony with a miracle most people would never believe existed. And this creature, this being that science said couldn't be real, had been there at my birth, had helped my mother survive, had remembered me for 37 years. "Can I touch him?" I asked, my voice breaking. My mother smiled. "Ask him," she said. I looked at Koa, into eyes that held more awareness than I'd been prepared for, and I spoke to him like he could understand, because I was beginning to believe he could. "May I?" I asked, gesturing to my hand to his. He made another sound, different this time, and took a final step forward, closing the distance between us. His hand touched mine, and the warmth of it, the reality of it, the impossible proof of it, sent a shock through my entire body. His palm was rough, calloused, strong. His fingers were long and thick and could have crushed my hand, but held it with remarkable gentleness. We stood there, connected, man and being, separated by millions of years of evolution, but united in this single moment of recognition. My mother's voice broke the silence gently. "Come inside," she said. "You must have 1,000 questions, and standing out here won't answer them." Koa released my hand slowly, deliberately, and stepped back to give us space. He made a low sound to Elizabeth, who responded in kind, and then he turned and walked toward the tree line with that same impossible grace. "Where's he going?" I asked, watching him disappear into the shadows. "To give us privacy," she said. "He understands that you and I need time alone. He'll be back later, probably with food. He likes to provide." The cabin's interior was small but meticulously organized. One room, maybe 400 square feet, with a sleeping loft accessed by a ladder. A wood stove in the corner, still warm from morning use. Shelves lined with books, jars of preserved foods, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. A small table with 2 chairs, handmade from what looked like cedar. A counter with a basin fed by a gravity-fed water system from the roof. No electricity visible except for a single LED lamp powered by the solar panels. It smelled like wood smoke and herbs, and the particular cleanness of a space kept tidy through necessity. "Sit," Elizabeth said, gesturing to the table. "I'll make tea. Real tea, not bark water, I promise." She smiled, trying to lighten the weight of everything we'd just experienced. I sat, my legs grateful for the rest, and watched her move around the small space with practiced efficiency. She filled a kettle from a jug of water, set it on the wood stove, pulled down 2 ceramic mugs that looked handmade. "I have a few luxuries I can't give up," she said. "Tea is one of them. I hike to concrete every 2 weeks, buy supplies, carry them back. Koa helps sometimes, though he has to stay hidden. People see a 9-foot creature carrying a backpack, and there'd be helicopters and scientists and everything we've worked to avoid. The kettle began to whistle. She poured water over tea bags in both mugs, set one in front of me, sat down with hers. We held our mugs like shields, the warmth something to focus on besides the enormity of the situation. "Ask," she said simply, "whatever you need to know." I had so many questions they tangled in my throat. I picked the most immediate. "How many of them are there?" "Koa's family. You said 5 originally. Are they all still here?" She shook her head, sadness crossing her features. "Luna, Koa's mate, died 8 years ago. Old age, I think, though it's hard to know for sure. I found her one morning in a grove she favored. She lying peacefully in the moss like she'd just decided to sleep. Koa mourned for weeks. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't engage, just sat by her body until I convinced him we needed to let the forest reclaim her. We buried her deep, covered the site with stones. He still visits sometimes." She sipped her tea. "The 3 juveniles, they're adults now. 2 males, 1 female. The males established their own territories, moved north and east to areas with less human activity. The female, I call her Sage, she stayed. She has a mate now from another group. They have 2 young ones of their own, so there are 4 in this immediate area. Koa, Sage, her mate Flint, and the 2 juveniles. Sometimes others pass through, but this valley is mostly theirs." "And they all know about you?" I asked. "Trust you?" She nodded. "Sage grew up with me around. To her, I'm just part of the landscape. Strange, but harmless. Flint was warier at first, but Sage vouched for me in whatever way they communicate these things. The juveniles are curious but cautious, which is good. Caution keeps them alive. They've seen humans, of course, from a distance. Hikers, hunters, forestry workers. They know to avoid us, generally speaking. But I'm different. I'm integrated. I tried to process this. My mother had spent 37 years living alongside a species science said didn't exist, integrated into their society to the point of being accepted as some kind of honorary member. "Have you ever tried to document them? Scientifically, I mean. Photographs, video, proof." She gave me a look that was equal parts sad and disappointed. "Marcus, what do you think would happen if I provided proof? Real, on undeniable evidence that a population of large primates exists in the Pacific Northwest? First, nobody would believe me. They'd call it a hoax, CGI, a person in a suit. And if they did believe me, what then? These mountains would be overrun with researchers, cryptozoologists, trophy hunters, tourists. Koa and his family would lose their home, their peace, possibly their lives. Someone would try to capture one for study. Someone else would try to kill one for fame. The government would get involved, declare the area protected or restricted, which sounds good, until you realize it means fences and guards and monitoring." She leaned forward, intensity in her voice. "I was trained as a scientist, Marcus. I know the value of documentation, of peer review, of advancing human knowledge. But I also know that some things are more important than scientific glory. These beings have lived here for thousands of years, possibly millions, managing to avoid human detection through intelligence and adaptation. They've survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions and the arrival of human civilization. Who am I to expose them for the sake of proving I'm not crazy? I made a choice decades ago to protect them rather than study them, and I've never regretted it. I understood, even if part of me wished I could show Emma, show the world, prove that this impossible thing was real." "Does anyone else know?" I asked. About them, about you living here." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There are a few people in Concrete who suspect something. The woman who runs the general store. She sold me supplies for 3 decades and never asked why I need 50 pounds of rice every month, or medical supplies I can't possibly use alone." A retired logger named Tom, who owns the land adjacent to this valley. He's seen tracks, heard calls, found structures. "We have an understanding. He doesn't come here, doesn't guide others here, and in return, I keep an eye on the forest, let him know if there are fires or diseased trees or invasive species. We've never explicitly discussed what I'm protecting, but he knows." And then there are the indigenous elders, the Nooksack and Lummi peoples who've lived in this region far longer than any European descendant. They know. Their traditions speak of the forest people, the hairy ones who walk upright and keep to themselves. Some of them know I live here, and know I've been accepted by what they call the Old Ones. They don't interfere because in their worldview, this is how things should be. Humans and others, coexisting with respect and distance. She finished her tea, set the mug down carefully. It's a small circle of knowing, and it stayed small through decades of careful discretion. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackle of the wood stove and the distant call of ravens outside. I thought about my life in Portland, my job analyzing data for a software firm, my apartment with its internet and streaming services and delivery food. I thought about Emma, who I'd left behind with promises of phone calls that I now realized I couldn't make because there was no cell service. I thought about the sheer impossibility of explaining any of this to anyone who hadn't stood in that clearing and felt Koa's hand in theirs. "What was he like?" I asked suddenly. "My father, David Park. You said I looked like him." Elizabeth's expression softened. David was kind, brilliant actually. He was studying salmon migration patterns, spent half his time waist-deep in cold rivers counting fish. He had this incredible patience for work that would bore most people to tears. Dark hair like yours, same jaw, same hands. We dated for about 4 months before I left for the field. It was casual, comfortable. We liked each other well enough, but neither of us was thinking long-term. He wanted to work in Alaska eventually. I wanted research appointments in remote areas. Our paths weren't aligned for anything permanent. When I didn't come back to Seattle, he tried to find me, called my parents, checked with the university, even filed a missing person report at one point. But I'd covered my tracks well enough, used the research grant as an excuse for extended field work, sent occasional postcards from Concrete to prove I was alive. Eventually he gave up, finished his doctorate, moved to Juneau. I heard through mutual friends that he got married in the late 70s, had kids of his own, became a respected fisheries biologist. He died in 2003, heart attack while on a research vessel. He was 56. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry you never got to meet him. He would have been proud of you." The weight of loss hit me then, the grief for a father I'd never known and now never could. "Did he ever know about me?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. I thought about telling him after you were born, but what would that accomplish? He'd have felt obligated to try to find you, to be involved somehow, and that would have complicated the adoption. You needed stability, not a biological father who didn't even know you existed, showing up with demands for custody or visitation. So I kept it to myself, one more secret among many." A sound outside made us both look toward the door. Heavy footsteps, deliberate and slow. Elizabeth stood, walked to the window, smiled. "Koa's back," she said, "and he brought lunch, apparently." She opened the door and Koa stood there, holding what looked like a freshly caught salmon in one massive hand. He made a sound, proud and pleased, and held the fish out to Elizabeth. She took it with both hands, thanked him in those strange vocalizations, and he made another sound, different this time, almost like a question while looking past her at me. "He's asking if you're staying for a meal," Elizabeth translated. I stood, moved to the doorway, looked at this impossible being who'd helped bring me into the world and was now offering to feed me. "Yes," I said, directing my words to Koa. "I'd be honored." He made a sound that might have been approval, then turned and walked to a nearby stream where he began to clean the fish with practiced efficiency, using a sharp stone and his incredible dexterity. Elizabeth watched him with obvious affection. "He's a good provider," she said quietly. Better than most humans I've known." We spent the afternoon in a routine that felt both surreal and oddly domestic. Elizabeth prepared the salmon with herbs from her garden, wild onions she'd gathered, and a method of cooking in cedar bark that she'd learned from Koa. Koa himself stayed close but not intrusive, sitting on a large rock near the cabin and working on what looked like a tool, shaping a piece of antler into something sharp and useful. I watched him work, marveling at the focus and skill, the way his massive hands could manipulate small objects with surprising delicacy. When the food was ready, we ate together, the three of us, sitting outside in the warm September sun. Koa ate his portion of fish raw, which made sense given his physiology, while Elizabeth and I had ours cooked. The taste was incredible, as fresh and clean and flavored with smoke and herbs in a way no restaurant could replicate. Koa watched me eat with what I could only describe as curiosity, making soft sounds occasionally that Elizabeth would respond to. "He's asking if you like it," she translated at one point. "Tell him it's delicious," I said. And she did, in those impossible sounds. And Koa's expression shifted into something that looked remarkably like pleasure. After the meal, Elizabeth suggested I stay the night. "It's a long hike back to your car," she said. "And honestly, I don't want you to leave yet. We have 37 years to catch up on." I thought about Emma, about my promise to check in, about the GPS tracker in my backpack that was probably causing her concern. But I also thought about this woman who'd given me life, and then given me up, and had carried that weight for decades. I thought about Koa, who'd been there at my birth and seemed genuinely glad to meet me. I thought about how this might be the only chance I'd ever have to truly understand where I came from. "I'll stay," I said, "but I need to hike back to where I have cell service tomorrow and call my wife. She'll be worried." Elizabeth nodded, understanding. "Of course. I forget sometimes that the rest of the world runs on constant communication. We can leave early, get you to a spot with service by mid-morning." She paused, then added carefully, "Will you tell her about all this?" I didn't know how to answer that. Emma was my partner, my best friend, the person I trusted most in the world. But how could I tell her I'd spent the weekend with Bigfoot? She'd think I'd lost my mind, or worse, that I was lying to her. "I don't know," I admitted. "I want to, but I'm not sure she'd believe me." Koa made a sound then, low and thoughtful. Elizabeth listened, then translated. "He says truth doesn't require belief to remain true. The question is whether sharing it causes more harm than keeping it does." I looked at this being who shouldn't exist, offering me wisdom about honesty and relationships, and I felt something shift in my understanding of intelligence and consciousness. "He's right," I said, "but I still don't know what to do." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that filtered through the canopy, Elizabeth showed me around her small domain, and the garden where she grew vegetables hardy enough to survive the mountain climate. The root cellar dug into the hillside where she stored preserved foods, the workshop area where she made tools and repaired equipment, the solar panels that gave her just enough electricity for lights and a small radio that she used to monitor weather reports. Everything was efficient, purposeful, designed for long-term survival with minimal impact. "I'm not a survivalist," she explained as we walked. "I don't stockpile weapons or prepare for societal collapse. I just choose to live simply, in harmony with this place and its inhabitants." Koa and his family taught me that you don't need much to be content. Food, shelter, companionship, purpose. Everything else is just noise. She picked a late-season tomato from a vine, handed it to me. "Taste this." I bit into it, and the flavor exploded in my mouth, sweet and acidic, and perfectly ripe. "This is what food is supposed to taste like," she said, "when it grows in good soil, drinks clean water, and ripens in actual sunlight." As darkness fell, Koa departed with a series of calls to Elizabeth, disappearing into the forest with that same impossible silence. "Where's he going?" I asked. "To his shelter," she said. "He has a structure about half a mile from here, built into a rock overhang, very well hidden. He values his privacy as much as I value mine, but we maintain proximity for mutual benefit, protection, companionship, shared resources. It's a good arrangement." She lit a lantern inside the cabin, the warm glow pushing back the darkness. "You'll sleep in the loft," she said. "I have extra blankets. It gets cold at night up here, even in September." The loft was surprisingly comfortable. A mattress stuffed with something that felt like cedar bark or dried grass, covered with wool blankets that smelled faintly of smoke. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the forest. Owls calling, something small rustling through underbrush, the distant sound of water over rocks. And below me, my mother moving around the cabin with quiet efficiency, banking the fire, washing dishes in a basin, humming softly to herself. A tune I didn't recognize, probably something she'd made up during her years alone. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with everything I'd learned, everything I'd seen, everything that challenged my understanding of reality. I thought about the data analysis work I did, finding patterns in numbers, making predictions based on observable trends. Everything about my professional life was built on logic and evidence and reproducible results. And here I was, lying in a loft in an off-grid cabin, having spent the day with a creature that defied every scientific principle I'd been taught to trust. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. "Marcus," Elizabeth's voice came from below. "You awake?" I climbed down the ladder, found her sitting at the table with 2 mugs of something steaming. "Chamomile tea," she said. "Helps with sleep. Sit with me." I sat, accepted the mug, breathed in the floral scent. "I can't reconcile it," I said. "Everything I know about biology, evolution, anthropology, it all says Koa shouldn't exist. But he does. I touched him. I ate food he caught. I heard him communicate. How do I process that?" She smiled, and the expression sad and understanding. I had the same crisis in 1971. Everything I'd learned in graduate school, every paper I'd read, every lecture I'd attended, they all said cryptids were folklore, misidentifications, hoaxes. But then I saw one, and all that certainty crumbled. I had a choice. I could deny what I'd experienced, call it a hallucination or a trick of the light, maintain my worldview at the cost of truth. Or I could accept that my education was incomplete, that the world contained wonders science hadn't catalogued yet, and adapt accordingly. I chose adaptation. "But you gave up everything," I said. "Your career, your family, normal life. Was it worth it?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea. "I won't lie and say I don't have regrets. I missed my parents' final years. They died thinking I was mentally unstable, living alone in the woods for reasons they couldn't understand. I missed having children in the conventional sense, missed relationships, community, the small comforts of modern life. But Marcus, I got to spend 37 years living alongside one of the greatest discoveries in human history. I learned things no anthropologist will ever know. I formed bonds that transcend species. I found a kind of peace most people search their whole lives for. So yes, it was worth it. For me. But I can't tell you whether knowing this truth is worth the burden it places on you. We talked until the early hours of morning, sharing stories. She told me about her parents, first-generation Chinese immigrants who'd built a successful restaurant in Seattle's International District, to who'd pushed her toward academic success as proof of the American dream. She told me about her early research, tracking wolves in the Olympics, studying bear behavior in the North Cascades, the work that had prepared her for life in remote wilderness. She told me about Luna, Koa's mate, and how watching their family dynamics had taught her that love and devotion weren't uniquely human traits. I told her about Robert and Susan Webb, my adoptive parents who'd raised me with kindness and stability, about my childhood in the suburbs, good schools and soccer leagues and summer camps, about meeting Emma in college, her patience with my analytical nature, the way she balanced my tendency toward overthinking with her spontaneity. About our life together, small and ordinary and good. And as I talked, I realized how much I had to be grateful for, or how the choice she'd made to give me up had given me exactly the life she'd hoped for me. The sky was beginning to lighten when we finally stopped talking. "You should try to sleep for a few hours," Elizabeth said. "We'll need to leave by 7 if you want to reach cell service by mid-morning." I nodded, climbed back to the loft, and this time sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the small window, and I could smell coffee, real coffee, brewing below. I climbed down to find Elizabeth and Koa outside, engaged in what looked like a serious conversation. When Elizabeth saw me, she waved me over. Koa stood, walked to me, and did something unexpected. He placed his massive hand on top of my head, gently, almost like a blessing, and made a sound I'd heard before, and the soft hooting he'd made when I was born. Then he released me, made a longer vocalization to Elizabeth, and walked into the forest. "What was that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "He was saying goodbye," Elizabeth said, her eyes wet. "In his way, he told me to tell you that you carry the forest inside you now, that you're always welcome here, and that keeping secrets is sometimes the highest form of respect." We hiked back to my car in near silence, both of us lost in thought. The forest seemed different now, alive with possibility, every shadow potentially hiding wonders I'd been blind to my entire life. When we reached the clearing where I'd parked, Elizabeth pulled me into a hug, fierce and tight and too brief. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for not thinking I'm crazy." I held her, as this woman who was my mother and a stranger, and somehow exactly who I needed her to be. "Thank you for telling me the truth," I said, "however impossible it is." "Will you come back?" she asked as she pulled away. I looked at her, at this extraordinary person who'd chosen an extraordinary life, and I knew the answer. "Yes," I said. "I don't know when, and I don't know how often, but yes, I need to process this, need to figure out how it fits into my life. But yes, I'll come back." She smiled, relief and joy mixing on her face. "Good, I'll be here. I'm always here." She pressed a piece of paper into my hand. "My schedule for supply runs. I'm in concrete the first and third Saturday of every month. If you need to reach me and can't make it out here, you can leave a message at the general store. Oh, the owner's name is Margaret." I drove back toward concrete, checking my odometer obsessively, until I reached an area where my phone showed a single bar of service. I pulled over, called Emma, and she answered on the first ring. "Marcus, oh my God, I've been going crazy. Are you okay? The GPS showed you hadn't moved in 2 days, and I almost called the police." Her voice was tight with worry and relief. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm sorry I couldn't call. There's no service where she lives. But I'm okay. Better than okay, actually." "How did it go? What's she like?" Emma asked, and I could hear her sitting down, settling in for the story. I looked out at the mountains, thinking about Koa and Elizabeth and the impossible truth I now carried. "She's remarkable," I said carefully. "Lives completely off-grid, very sustainable, very independent. And she had good reasons for giving me up. We talked a lot. I learned about my biological father, about her life, about why she made the choices she did. All true, just incomplete." "And?" Emma prompted. "Are you glad you went?" "Yes," I said, and I meant it completely. "I'm glad I went. It answered questions I didn't even know I had." We talked for 20 more minutes, me describing the cabin and the forest, and Elizabeth herself, leaving out the most crucial details, feeling the weight of deception, even as I told myself it was necessary. When we finally hung up, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the mountains and wrestling with what I'd become. A keeper of secrets, a guardian of impossible knowledge, a bridge between two worlds that most people didn't even know existed. Over the following months, I fell into a pattern. I visited Elizabeth every 6 weeks or so, telling Emma I was maintaining a relationship with my birth mother, which was true, just not the whole truth. Each visit, I learned more. Elizabeth taught me to identify edible plants, to read weather patterns in the behavior of animals, to move through the forest with minimal impact. Koa and I developed our own relationship, built on mutual curiosity and respect rather than words. He showed me structures his family had built, elaborate frameworks of branches that served purposes I could only guess at. He taught me through demonstration how to find water sources, how to detect the presence of predators, how to tell the age of a tree by its bark patterns. Sage, his daughter, eventually warmed to me enough to let me observe her with her own offspring. Watching an infant of their species play, or tumble, explore its environment with fearless curiosity, I understood something profound about the universality of childhood. This being, this creature that science said couldn't exist, was raising its young with the same mixture of patience and concern I'd seen in human parents at playgrounds. Love, protection, education, they weren't human inventions. They were fundamental to consciousness itself. Emma knew something had changed in me. I was different after that first visit, more contemplative, more aware of the natural world, more willing to question my assumptions. She asked about it over dinner one night in January of 2011, 4 months after that first meeting. "You're different," she said, not accusatory, just observant. "Happier, I think. More settled. Is it because of Elizabeth?" I nodded. Because that was the truth, even if it wasn't the complete truth. She's given me perspective on life, on what matters, on how to find peace in uncertainty. "I'm glad," Emma said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. She paused, then added carefully, "Would she ever want to meet me? I know she's private, lives remotely, but I'd like to meet the woman who gave you life, if she's open to it." My heart clenched. The thought of Emma meeting Elizabeth, of my two worlds colliding, terrified me. But I also knew that keeping them separate forever wasn't sustainable. "I'll ask," I said. "Next time I visit, I'll ask if she'd be comfortable with that." When I posed the question to Elizabeth on my next visit, she surprised me by saying yes. "If Emma matters to you, I want to know her, and she should know the truth about me, or about this place, about the choice you've made to protect it." Secrets erode relationships, Marcus. I know that from experience. Tell her, if you trust her, bring her here. Let her decide what to do with the knowledge. The idea terrified me. What if Emma thought I was insane? What if she couldn't accept it? What if knowing the truth damaged our relationship irreparably? But Elizabeth was right. The secret was already eroding us, creating distance where there shouldn't be any. I told Emma on a Saturday morning in March of 2011, exactly 1 year after I'd received that first letter. We were having coffee in our apartment, rain drumming against the windows, and I just started talking. I told her everything: the letter, the journey, meeting Elizabeth, the revelation about Koa, all of it. She listened without interrupting, with her expressions cycling through disbelief, concern, skepticism, and something that might have been wonder. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You're serious," she finally said. "You're genuinely telling me that Bigfoot is real, and your mother lives with one, and you've been visiting them for months?" I nodded, waiting for her to laugh or get angry or tell me I needed therapy. Instead, she stood, walked to the window, stared out at the rain. "I should think you've lost your mind," she said quietly. "Everything about this story is impossible. But I know you, Marcus. You're the most rational, analytical, skeptical person I've ever met. You don't believe in conspiracy theories or UFOs or psychic phenomena. If you're telling me this is real, then you believe it's real, which means either you've experienced something extraordinary or you've had some kind of break from reality." She turned to look at me. "So which is it?" "It's real, Emma," I said, my voice steady. "I know how it sounds. I know what I'm asking you to believe. But it's real. I've touched him. I've watched him communicate with Elizabeth. I've eaten food he caught and cleaned. He's real, and if you're willing, I want you to meet him." She studied my face for a long moment, searching for signs of delusion or deception. Then she smiled, just a little, and shook her head in wonder. "All right," she said. "I'm either about to have the most amazing experience of my life, or discover my husband has completely lost it. Either way, I need to see this for myself. When can we go?" 3 weeks later, on a clear April morning, Emma and I made the drive to Concrete together. I'd warned her about the hike, about the lack of cell service, about the need for absolute secrecy. She'd agreed to all of it, though I could see the skepticism in her eyes, the belief that she was humoring a delusion. We followed the same route I'd taken that first time, past the 3 white stones, down the fire road to the clearing. And there, waiting as promised, was Elizabeth. "You must be Emma," my mother said, extending her hand. "Marcus has told me so much about you." Emma shook her hand, smiling politely, playing along with what she clearly thought was an elaborate setup. "It's nice to meet you," she said. "Marcus speaks highly of you too." She glanced at me, an expression that said, "See, I'm being supportive of your eccentric birth mother. Just a normal woman living in the woods. Nothing crazy here." I almost laughed. She had no idea what was coming. The hike to the cabin took an hour, Elizabeth and I maintaining the kind of comfortable silence that came from familiarity, while Emma stayed alert, observant, probably cataloguing details to analyze later. When we crested the ridge and the valley came into view, Emma stopped, catching her breath. "This is beautiful," she said, and I heard the genuine appreciation in her voice. "I can see why you'd choose to live here." Elizabeth smiled. "It chooses you as much as you choose it. Come, I'll make tea. And then, if Koa's willing, you'll get to meet someone extraordinary." Inside the cabin, Emma's skepticism began to crack. She saw the efficiency of Elizabeth's setup, the intelligence required to maintain this life, the obvious sanity and capability. Yet this wasn't a delusional hermit. This was a brilliant woman who'd made an unconventional choice. Over tea, Elizabeth told her story again, the same one she'd told me, watching Emma's expressions shift from polite interest to genuine engagement, to, finally, a kind of desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a delusion. "I want to believe you," Emma said when Elizabeth finished. "God, I want to believe this is real, because if it is, it changes everything we think we know about the world." "But I'm a teacher, Elizabeth. I teach biology to high school students. I teach them about taxonomy and evolution and the scientific method. And everything I teach says what you're describing is impossible." Elizabeth nodded, understanding. "I was a scientist too. I know the resistance you're feeling. But science is built on observation and evidence, so let me provide you with both. Koa should be nearby. He knew you were coming. He's curious." We went outside, and Elizabeth made a call, a series of vocalizations that echoed through the valley. We waited in silence, Emma gripping my hand so tightly it hurt. And then he came, emerging from the tree line with that impossible grace, 9 feet of living impossibility. Emma made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, and her knees buckled. I caught her, held her up, whispered, "It's okay. He won't hurt you. Just breathe." Koa approached slowly, clearly aware of Emma's fear. He stopped about 15 feet away and did something I'd never seen him do before. He sat down, cross-legged, making himself smaller, less threatening. Then he made that soft, hooting sound, and the one he'd made when I was born, the one that meant gentleness and welcome. Emma was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was also staring with absolute focus, her scientific training warring with her emotional reaction. "He's real," she whispered. "Oh my God, Marcus, he's real." We spent 3 hours in that valley. Koa demonstrated his tool-making abilities for Emma, showing her the stone implements he used for various tasks. He brought her a bundle of early spring flowers, a gesture of welcome that made her cry again. He let her approach, let her stand close enough to see the intelligence in his eyes, the careful consideration of his movements. And when we finally had to leave, when the afternoon light began to fade and we needed to make the hike back, Koa did for Emma what he'd done for me. He placed his hand on her head, and gently, and made that sound of blessing and farewell. On the drive back to Portland, Emma was silent for the first hour, processing. Then she turned to me and said, "We can never tell anyone." Not a question, a statement. I nodded. "I know." She looked out the window at the passing forest. "I teach kids about the natural world. I encourage them to be curious, to ask questions, to seek evidence. And now I know there's evidence of something extraordinary that I can never share, never use to inspire them, never allow to advance human knowledge. That's going to be hard to live with." "I know," I said again. "Believe me, I know." She reached over, laced her fingers through mine. "But I understand why," she continued. "I saw Koa. I saw the trust in his eyes when he looked at Elizabeth, the curiosity when he looked at us. And he's not a specimen to be studied. He's a person in every way that matters. And people deserve privacy, safety, the right to exist without being exploited." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Thank you for trusting me with this, for letting me see, for letting me be part of this impossible thing." That was 14 years ago. Emma and I visit Elizabeth every few months now, timing our trips with the seasons. We've watched Koa's family grow, seen new members pass through the valley, learned the rhythms of life that exist outside human civilization. Elizabeth is 76 now, still strong and capable, but I see age catching up with her. Koa is aging too, his reddish-brown hair now streaked with white, his movements still graceful but more deliberate. We've made plans for when Elizabeth can no longer care for herself. A small cabin on our property outside Portland, far enough from neighbors for privacy, close enough for us to provide care. Koa has been part of these discussions. He wants to stay in his valley, but he wants Elizabeth safe and happy. My adoptive parents, Robert and Susan, passed away never knowing the full truth. I quit my data analysis job in 2015, started working as a freelance consultant. It gave me more time for visits, more flexibility. David Park's other children, my half-siblings, I've never met them. That's a door I've chosen to keep closed, not because I don't want to know them, but because opening it would require too many lies or too much truth. They have their own lives, their own stories, and bringing me into their world would mean explaining things I can't explain. Sometimes I wonder if they think about me, and if they know I exist. But mostly, I let them live in peace, just as I ask the world to let Koa and his family live in peace. The secret has weight. There are days when I see news stories about wildlife conservation, and I want to scream that there's an entire species we don't acknowledge. But then I think about Koa, about their right to exist peacefully, safely, and I keep the secret. Standing in that clearing 14 years ago, I thought I was ending a search for my origins, but I was beginning something else. A different kind of family that crosses species, a responsibility to protect something precious and fragile. My mother made a choice in 1973 to give me a conventional life. It was an act of love, sacrificing her happiness for my security. But now I make a choice every day to honor her sacrifice by protecting what she's protected. Sometimes, late at night, I go outside and look at the stars. I think about the vastness of the universe, about all we don't know, and I feel grateful. Grateful for this impossible story. Grateful for Elizabeth's courage. Grateful for Emma's belief. Grateful for Koa's acceptance. I found my birth mother in 2010, living off-grid in the Cascade Mountains with a creature that raised her and has been her family for over 4 decades. And in finding her, I found a truth more extraordinary than any answer I'd imagined. Not just about where I came from, but about what family means, what intelligence looks like, what it costs to protect something you love. I carry the forest inside me now, just like Koa said, and that weight, that privilege, that responsibility has made me more human than I ever was before.